A couple of examples. I don't know if you can see this very well. I don't know how many of you have seen this movie, Primal Fear, with Richard Gere and Edward Norton, 1999. Fairly terrible movie. The movie's about a murder. And in this murder, a clue is left at the crime scene. And the clue is a number. And it turns out that the number is a call number to a private library. And then it turns out that the book that the call number belongs to is Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Okay, I'm a 19th century American literature professor, so this is already one of the great moments of film history. But I actually have another point. So there's a passage underlined in the Scarlet Letter that is relevant to the case, which doesn't matter here. So in the courtroom scene, this is the district attorney, who you can probably barely see, hands a copy of the Scarlet Letter to the police detective and says, "Would you read the passage aloud to the court?" And then says, "What does that passage mean to you?" Also very familiar. At which point Richard Gere jumps to his feet and he says, "Objection, the man is a police officer, not an English professor. Any interpretation would be speculative and irrelevant." Oops. To which the judge, Alfred Woodard, says, "I didn't hear her ask for an expert opinion. The witness may answer." Because I am one, I can say this. Let us pause briefly to imagine that had there been an English professor on the stand, that would have cleared anything up. But even that is not my point. To me, this little scene reflects a cultural bias that captures everything that I feel I struggle against in teaching my students. And it's this cultural bias about expertise. The implication of this little exchange is that experts know, amateurs speculate. Experts don't speculate. Amateurs are uncertain. Experts are certain. But in fact, everyone in this room knows that experts speculate all the time. And that in fact, you could say that one of the things that makes experts experts is their ability to speculate expertly. We know a lot about expert novice learning. There are people in this room who know much more about it than I do. But this is digested from the book How People Learn. Some of you may know. Characteristics of expert novice learning. Experts notice patterns of information that are not noticed by novices. Right? Emphasis on patterns. Or as Bill Servin, a friend of mine at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, would say, the difference between expert learners and novice learners is that experts think about what kind of a problem is. Experts' knowledge is organized in ways that reflects deep understanding. So it's the organization of the knowledge, not just the knowledge itself. Expert knowledge is conditionalized in the sense that it's not isolated facts. Experts remember things because they're situated in very meaningful stories or contexts that you can recall. It's not the facts, it's the context, or it's the relationship between them. And then finally, experts have flexibility in their approach to new situations. Experts can maneuver without really knowing what they're doing. Now, we all know that in faculty meetings and all that. But again, that's one of the things that is an indication of expert-like thinking, is your ability to move forward without having all the knowledge you need. And that's how you get to complexity. That's how you get to nuance. That's how you experience surprise. That's how you exercise flexible understanding, being able to move forward without knowing everything. My experience working with hundreds and hundreds of faculty at scores and scores of institutions over the last 20 years is that most faculty mostly value flexible thinking in their students. That at some level, you want your students to understand, and understanding has something to do with flexibility. And I guess my main point is, if you want to teach flexible thinking, you have to design for it. It doesn't just happen by taking stuff in. So, for example, one of my colleagues at Georgetown, Jim Sandifer, and I'm not going to play you any of this because I want to sort of gallop along, but one of the things he did with our center was that he realized after a long time teaching that he was very frustrated that his students, sort of like Dan Bernstein, could not work non-trivial problems on the exam. He was, in this particular case, teaching a junior level mathematics course, very pivotal course to making a turn to higher level mathematics. He was very frustrated that most of the students couldn't make this turn. So we asked him in our center, running the Center for Teaching, what do you know about the way your students go about solving problems in the middle of their problem-solving processes? He said, not much. Teaching 20 years, high evaluations, teaching award, very comfortable saying, not much. So we taped a lot of his students doing what we call think-alouds, thinking aloud, talking aloud as they're solving problems. Jim spent scores of hours studying these. He now has a couple on his website, this one where he's labeled, very nice little movie of showing the progress of a student. He discovered a couple really fundamental things that had nothing to do with lack of preparation or poor mathematical knowledge. He discovered that they were unable or unwilling to go on to step 2 without being confident of step 1. And yet he says, I'll take his word for it, mathematicians do that all the time. Right? But they wouldn't do that. He'd teach them 3 different methods. And he'd say, try each method for 10 minutes. That's what mathematicians do. They wouldn't. He'd watch them spending 30 minutes on one method. In minute 6, they'd be saying, I know this isn't going to work. And in minute 26, they're saying, see, I knew this wasn't going to work. It is phenomenal. He said they looked like wind-up cars that had like bumped into the leg of the sofa. Right? And he could also see that they could not articulate what it was they were trying to try or why they were trying to try it. So he ended up, I won't go into this here, completely changing his practice to focus around things like risk-taking, multiple paths and approaches, and communication of rationale. Stuff he had never thought that he needed to design a higher order mathematics course around. A couple other examples of just thinking about getting novices access to how experts see things. Very quickly, this is a project out of the Visible Knowledge Project that I directed. Someone at the University of Southern California, Viet Nguyen, teaches Asian American literature. One of the texts he teaches is an incredibly stymieingly difficult text called Dictée by a woman named Teresa Cha. So one of the things he did is he created a web-based reading guide to the first 20 pages of this 250-page, very difficult text. And you can just go through and click page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. And here's an example. So like up in the upper left, he put up a page. He'll highlight certain parts of it. If you roll your cursor over the yellowed part, then certain things come up. And the things that come up are the things that he thinks about when he's reading. It becomes a 20-page guided tour to his expert-like reading. It's not the answers, it's what I'm thinking about. I'm wondering why this word. I'm wondering why I introduced this here. Then he has posts down here with questions and then links to Blackboard. So one of the things the students do is when they hit a question they're interested, they go in directly to Blackboard and respond to it. But the idea is that he slows down the reading of that first 20 pages and he maps it. English professors do this all the time in class. It's just a matter of saying, well, maybe that's one place it can happen. But maybe students don't always recognize that as modeling. Maybe they recognize it as something else. Very different example. This is some simulations that were created by Carl Wyman, who is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, won the Nobel Prize in 2001, took his Nobel Prize money and sunk it almost entirely into creating simulations for teaching first-year physics. And he has built these fabulous simulations and put them online. This is an example of a kind of how to build an electronic circuit program that he created. They did a very intensive study to see whether or not it was better for students to build the circuits by hand or build them virtually. And the data they got was that it was much better for them to build them virtually than by hand in this instance. And their speculation is because this simulates what the current looks like when it's actually running. That it actually gives them a visualization of a part of the process that students need to understand the process. Incidentally, as a matter of full disclosure, I could not get my circuit to work.